Hey, and welcome back to one of our solo episodes of Big Asian Energy. Today, we're going to dive into the concept of perfection paralysis. If you have ever had an idea for a project, either writing a book or starting a creative project or, even creating a piece of art, but over and over you found yourself overthinking it and having trouble either completing it, starting it, or putting it out there, you've probably known what it feels like to experience perfection paralysis. This is a concept I talk about in my book, Big Asian Energy, because I grew up feeling this so many times. I can't tell you how many times I've started a piece of writing that I wanted to publish, a video that I wanted to film, or really like a ton of different things that I've never made it past the drawing board because I was so worried about how people would see it. And this is something I constantly hear from so many of my clients who want to achieve a goal, reach a dream, but yet hold themselves back. They feel stuck oftentimes. And this is actually the specific word that they keep coming back to again and again and again. They'll come to me and they'll say, John, I feel stuck. I know what I want to do, but I don't know what the right way is. As if they're waiting for someone either to give them permission and say, this is time to start, or they're waiting for someone to tell them exactly what to do or what to say. So I want to dive into, first and foremost, some of the psychology behind it, but also how do we actually break free from it, and even where does it come from? um, I think for anyone who grew up in a family where there was, let's say, high standards for performance or expectations from your parents, this is something that you might have experienced, especially if you, let's say, had Asian parents who, really stressed on making sure that whatever you create is not just doing well, but also is a reflection on the family. Because this is where perfection paralysis really starts. It's not actually about doing something better. So, to start with, the definition of perfection paralysis is a state of inaction or feeling stuck that results from maladaptive perfectionism, which is an intense fear of making mistakes or not meeting impossibly high standards. And it's oftentimes linked to procrastination because essentially we think procrastination as being lazy, like I don't want to get started on something, but really what it has to do with is this feeling that if I don't do it perfectly, then other people will judge me for it. So I don't want to start until I feel fully prepared. And for so many of us, we get caught in that, like, I need to prepare more. I need to think a little bit more about this. I need to, like, do a little bit more research, read a few more books, talk to a few more people. But it never actually gets out, or we miss the fact that in order for us to actually get better at something, we have to start imperfectly. So the core driver is not about laziness, but usually a fear of criticism, failure, or judgment. There's been a lot of studies done around this, especially the terms of adaptive perfectionism versus maladaptive perfectionism. So I'll explain it. In psychology, adaptive perfectionism is a pretty healthy striving for excellence because you just want to have high standards. Um, and it's so totally okay that you value excellence and high standards. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's when we take on the belief that our self-worth is tied to the performance, which is to say, if I don't do this right, then other people are going to judge not my work, but judge me for it. Then I need to do better or more in order to come out from this. And the paralysis part in particular is really that sense of anxiety about imperfection that is so overwhelming that it outweighs the desire to actually complete the tasks. And that's where it comes from. A lot of times, perfectionism, especially maladaptive perfectionism, is tied deeply to shame versus guilt. And what I mean by that is perfectionism comes from shame, as in, like, if I don't do this right, then I am a failure. Whereas guilt is if I do something wrong and it causes an impact to other people, then I feel guilty about it. So shame is what actually leads us into the inaction and hiding from it. And from the cultural context, for those who grew up in environments where achievement and family honor are deeply tied. So an example would be that if you grew up and Your parents didn't just say like, oh, it's important for you to do well because you have these goals. Like you want to be a creative person, you want to achieve this. So we support you in doing better, but that your success is going to reflect on our family, or saying things like, what will other people think of us as a family if you were to do this? If you fail at something, how will other people see me? This oftentimes comes through in strict parenting or families that really focus on academic success, and avoiding mistakes or losing face can really come into that part. There's also another part of this that we don't talk about often, is the idea of conditional acceptance, which is that the belief that our belonging in our family can be tied to conditional acceptance as well. So the psychology of being stuck really comes from a fear of negative evaluation, or the idea of our fixed mindset and our self-worth. So I remember a few years ago, I was leading a workshop on productivity. And a lot of people don't realize this, but productivity has intense ties to our childhood conditioning and our mindset when we're growing up. And I'm not saying that to suggest that if you were lazy as a kid, then you won't be productive later on. But what I mean by that is how often we feel stuck and how often we procrastinate. And the reason for this is because almost everyone experiences procrastination. Usually I like to start these kind of workshops and I'll ask everyone in the audience, and I'll just say, who here procrastinates? And everyone's hands go up, because everybody procrastinates. Nobody doesn't procrastinate. And then I'll ask, who here's procrastinating something right now? And again, like most people's hands would go up. And then I will ask, who here knows why they're procrastinating? And this is where it gets interesting, because I would have a smattering of hands kind of go up, and people would say, oh, I'm procrastinating because I'm not ready yet, or I need to do more research, or I just feel like something is causing me to feel stuck. What's so interesting about procrastination is that procrastination is actually a result of not laziness, which is what we usually think about, but a manifestation of perfectionism. Perfectionism is actually a fear, right? Like there's two types of perfectionism that we usually talk about. There's maladaptive and adaptive perfectionism. Adaptive perfectionism is fine. It's just called having high standards. It's a good thing to have. It just means that we are detail oriented and we want something to be perfect. But you'll usually see that people who are perfectionists in a healthy way, they're able to still get stuff out. They just know that it has to start imperfectly as a draft and then gets refined and refined and refined before it can send out. Perfection paralysis, on the other hand, is different. Perfection paralysis comes when maladaptive, meaning a bad form of adaptation, comes out, where we feel stuck because the fear of being judged negatively makes us so we're so fearful of getting started that we're afraid of being seen as failures. So typically speaking, especially around high achievers and high performers, this is a super common thing. Like everyone's hands go up. And usually when we're talking about this, they'll say things like, I don't know why, but I'm just not feeling motivated. Or I don't know why I'm just not like disciplined, or I don't have enough time for it, or I'm doing all these things. But the truth is when we're taking a look at even the term motivation, motivation is just desire, right? Like motivation just comes from, do I want to do something right now? And motivation can either come from a desire to get away from pain or a desire to move towards pleasure. That's it. Those are the only two desires we really ever have. If we're feeling hungry, we are motivated to go eat food. If we're feeling full, then we stop. So the motivation goes away. Now, usually, anything we do is going to have some level of uncertainty or fear attached to it. And this could be things that we enjoy. Like even if you're playing a video game, there's an expectation or some kind of chance that you might fail at it. But usually it's when the fear of the pain that comes from failing can be so high that it pushes us to feel paralyzed. The paralyzing lack of motivation that comes from the fear of, if I don't do this task perfectly, then it's not that the task has failed, but that we are failures. And this is what causes us to hold back from taking action, because we're afraid of being judged or criticized. I'll give an example. A few years ago, I was talking to a client and he wanted to start a YouTube channel. And I remember chatting with him and I was like, great. Have you filmed anything yet? Have you done anything? How long have you been preparing for this? He said, oh gosh, like I think I've been doing this for like 4 years. And I said, wow, 4 years is a long time. How many videos have you filmed? And he said, none. And he went on to show me like all of the equipment that he had. We're talking like fancy cameras. He built a home studio. He had fancy lights. He had all of these things set up. And he took courses. He hired someone to come by and like give him a social media strategy and like set up his backdrop. But every time he said he started to film, he would notice something was wrong. Like the lighting wasn't perfect, or he needs a better microphone, or something, the background wasn't perfect. And he would then spend like hours and hours and hours of time looking up on YouTube or Google to see what's the perfect equipment, the right lens, and all these kind of things. And he worked so hard. We're talking 4 years, probably dozens, if not hundreds of hours going into the research work for this. If only he just picked up his phone and have started filming himself. And I get it. It feels intimidating, right? We can feel really intimidated and vulnerable when we are opening ourselves up to a new project, because when you put something out there that you've created, you're also opening a wound for the world to see, right? Because you create something great, people might attack it, people might dislike it. And if you grew up in an environment, or you grew up being told that the value of who you are is based on the value of your work, to say like, if you become a doctor, then people will respect you. The inherent statement behind that is that if you don't become a doctor, or you don't become a CEO, or you don't become financially successful, then you are not worthy of respect. And that could go really, really, really deep. And first and foremost, we know this objectively doesn't make any sense. There are people who don't respect doctors at all. And there are people who respect a lot of other careers and a lot of other types of people. It's not this universal thing. There are people I know who are like, I would never respect a CEO, but I would respect an artist. There are people I know who is like, I really only respect people who do work that is beyond their own personal benefit. So I would never respect somebody who works in finance. And then you will meet somebody else who is like, actually, I only respect people who work in finance because it takes a tremendous amount of work to get there. But either way, when we put so much of our own self-worth and value on how other people view us, then we're never in control, right? Because you could put out the greatest work you've ever seen, and somebody out there is going to have different taste than you and might not like it. I love it when people go into, yes, but there's like work that is unimpeachably perfect. And I would say, well, like what? And people will list various things. They'll be like, oh, this book is amazing. I wish I could be a writer like this author, or I could make a movie that's as good as this, or I can have a project or this app that is as good as this. And I would say, go check the reviews for the thing that you think is perfect online and tell me what you see. And invariably, and I mean, you could go and find the best films ever recognized in history as being like, these are the best films. Like we're talking like Citizen Kane or The Godfather, whatever it is. And you will see even the top ranking ones will have a ton of reviews, because there's always going to be critics, because it's easy to criticize. It's easy to point out problems that other people have, because for the most part, we usually use work as a barometer for how we feel about ourselves, right? So there's always going to be critics. But the fear of that outward perfectionism and the fear of having that outward identity and that egoic identity getting attacked is so deep and so hard, especially because we are constantly in a society where we see other people who are putting their best selves out there, their most perfect, polished version of themselves. And sometimes it can feel like everyone else has their life together except for us. So the belief becomes, if I do this imperfectly, then people will finally know that I don't actually know what I'm doing, and they'll judge me for it. So that anxiety can set the bar so high that if we can't do it perfectly in the first 5 minutes, then we immediately go, okay, I'm just not ready yet. And I always take a look at this and I always think like, well, ready for what? Ready to be perfect? Like, can you ever truly be perfect? Can you ever create something perfectly in the first try? Of course not. If you're an artist, you painted a really messy piece, you probably go, "Oh man, okay, that didn't work. Let me start over or let me fix it." And we don't have to take it to mean I must be a terrible artist. It just means the idea didn't work. And at the core of our fear of failure, a lot of times isn't actually about the failure itself. It's about being seen as a failure. And especially the case, of course, if you grew up in a society or a culture in which the outward appearance of perfection is sometimes more important than what we're actually doing. And the concept of face comes up, right? These kind of things can really get out of hand. I remember there was that tragic story of, I think her name is Jennifer Pan. There was like a Netflix documentary that talked about it, where there's this girl who grew up in, let's say, strict Asian parents. And she had struggled in school to the point that I think like she dropped out. But instead of just going to her parents and saying, hey, look, I kind of messed this up. I need some time to kind of get my stuff together and maybe some help, maybe a little bit of support, which is pretty normal. She was so terrified of her parents' responses and reactions that she basically lied to them and said, no, everything's great. I'm still in school. I'm getting great grades. And the ending of that story is really tragic. She ended up kind of essentially having mental health issues. And I think she hired someone to come and like attack her parents. But just take a moment and think about how dark her mind has to be, that the idea of telling her parents the truth early on was so unacceptable that this is the only path she could take. Now, I'm in no way trying to suggest that this is an Asian thing or even suggest that Jennifer Pan is somehow not at fault for her actions. Obviously, what happened later on is such a horrific example and a depiction of who we are. But that little moment is that hiding, I think, is commonly felt enough by at least perhaps small, perhaps large, but a percentage of people who live in our society that I think is worth looking at. Because the irony, of course, is that imperfections are actually the way to mastering any skills. We are human. We're supposed to go through struggles and have hard times. But I can't help but wonder what would have happened if somebody around her had simply told her that, okay, you're struggling. It's okay to be struggling. Was that even offered to her as a chance? And regardless, what she did was, of course, unforgivable. But it's hard to think about what happened in the beginning without thinking about what would have happened if somebody else gave her that opportunity. This is the thing. Failure is a necessity of success. When you teach a child how to walk for the first time, they're going to fail again and again, right? They're going to get up, they're going to take a few steps, they're going to fall over. You're going to then go, oh, okay, well, let's help you back up. And they're going to get back up and try again and again. One question I've always loved asking is like, well, how many times do you give a child chances to stand up and walk until they can walk before you give up on them? How many times until you go, okay, maybe walking is just not for you? Of course, the answer is you never do. You always give a child more chances because it's just something they have to learn. And eventually they will learn, even if they take a few more weeks compared to their siblings or their cousins or friends, right? We don't even think about it. It just happens because every failure teaches a lesson on how to balance, how to stand, and how to move forward. We don't tell somebody that they can't continue. One of my favorite YouTubers is Mark Rober, and he did this MIT speech one time, this MIT commencement speech. And he shared this research about how I think he gave out like 50,000 people had a chance to solve this puzzle that he had put together or something along those lines. And what he realized that if people were working without being afraid of being punished for making mistakes, they generally stuck with that task longer. And engineers, generally speaking, usually find that trial and error is usually the best way to try to solve a problem, because instead of trying to get it right the first time before you start testing it, it's just easier to run it through and see what errors come up. And then you can work on just that part. It's actually a much more efficient way to get through. But unless you're willing to take that first chance to run that code through or to test out the theory, you're never going to be able to actually fix it. See, when we associate our failures with our identity, it becomes impossible to take this action. Of course, we feel paralyzed because it's not that I failed at this project, it's that I am a failure when it comes to this project. And if we never start doing something difficult and expecting that at some point we're going to mess up, then we're going to keep procrastinating it until we eventually get to a point where we just go, let me just give up. Let me just say that this is something that some people are good at and some people can do, but it's not for me. It's just, this is not a reasonable thing that I should do. It's easier to keep rewriting our manuscript than to show it to anybody because when we don't show it, when we don't put it out there, there's still a chance that it's perfect. But when we put it out there, then we have to face the fact that it might be good, it might be great, it might be okay, but the next one might be better. So instead of showing people the dance routine that we practice in our bed or giving that speech that we always wanted to try or signing up to give that TED talk, it becomes easier just to leave our dreams in the cupboard. Now, perfectionism, generally speaking, is really hard to break because the perfectionism is about the underlying beliefs that we have underneath it rather than the act itself. So this limited view that we take on of ourselves can become a really comfortable crutch that we don't want to let go of. If you ever read the book Mindset by psychologist Carol Dweck, she talks a lot about this. She calls it the difference between fixed mindset and growth mindsets, right? For fixed mindset, the belief is that if we do something and fail at it, then it must be because I cannot do it. I just don't have the capacity to do it. Where if you have a growth mindset, then it's that, okay, if we make a mistake, then we just got to correct it. But this belief, especially if you grew up being told that you're supposed to be smart or you're supposed to have a lot of potential, can be really hard to break. I still remember when I was working with this client years ago. And it really wasn't just about this one client, but really it was a very common thing I saw across multiple clients. And I remember he was saying something along the lines of, everyone has always told me how smart I am since I was a kid. Everyone. My parents always told me how smart I am. My peers said I was smart. And over time, I believed it. But that actually caused me to not want to take bigger chances. Because if you're saying I am supposed to be good at this and I try it and I fail at it, then it turns out that everyone must be wrong. I'm not smart enough. In fact, I'm not smart at all, which is so ironic because when you kill that project early on, it never gives you the chance to let our talents shine, right? It never gives us a chance to let us see how far I can push this. As they say, good is the enemy of great, but perfect is also the enemy of great. So when we start thinking, man, like who I am is supposed to be defined by the examples of how smart I am, then it can be really terrifying to put things out there. Because the truth is that we are all perfectly imperfect beings. It's who we are at birth and who we will be when we die. Perfect is in how complete we are in that whatever we create will be imperfect, but we as ourselves can never be imperfect. And the imperfection in that we are all kind of making it up along the way, and that no one can ever be perfect because we'll continuously go through. So if you're having a tough day, a slow day, an unsure day, or just one of those days where you're just lying in bed and kind of going like, I can't even get out, somebody come and feed me ice cream. Just remember, it's not about you. You are not bad at being a good human being. You are a good human who's having a bad day.